Hello, random beloved viewer. You are watching OurStorySoFar.tv. I'm Garrett, aka New Angel, and this is episode 12, the one we've been building up to since episode 8. It was pretty obvious, but that doesn't make this any less fun. It's time to show off the toughest, mightiest, wartiest warriors the gaming universe has to offer. It's time for Battletoads and Double Dragon, the ultimate team. Some background on the game itself. Although Battletoads was developed by Rare and Double Dragon was initially developed by Technos Japan Corporation, or TJC, TradeWest, who had long published both series of games, appears to have been the driving force behind this game. TradeWest continued to serve as publisher, but in this crossover game, Rare took the helm and brought all 5 of our heroes to life, which I'm assuming just left TJC to sit back and collect the royalties for use of their characters. Battletoads and Double Dragon was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Game Boy, the Super NES, and the Sega Genesis. While I definitely remember renting the NES version when I was younger, I'll only be showing off the SNES and Genesis versions because that's all I had to capture from. Do you know how expensive the 8-bit Nintendo version of this game is? I know, I could emulate it, but I'm doing these things by the book. Retro gaming just isn't the same when it's done via emulation. But back to the game. Battletoads is an immensely difficult franchise, and it had that reputation since the earliest game appeared on the NES. Well, players of the Super Nintendo version of this game will be quickly reminded of that. Some people might call me crazy, but I'm sure the game changes difficulty depending on the character you select. Although I can't find anyone on the internet to back up that theory, notice that when I use any of the Battletoads, these Retro Blasters as they're called in the manual, just beat the tar out of me. But here I play as Jimmy Lee, and they're a breeze. The Genesis and Super Nintendo versions of the game also have their differences. Different sprites are used, and Mode 7 effects the Super Nintendo is capable of are obviously going to be absent from the Genesis. But I also found the Genesis version of the game to be slightly easier overall. The real challenge seems to come when you treat this as a Battletoads game on a Nintendo console, or what I call the way it's meant to be played. Yes, I know, shots fired. I'll openly admit, I was a Nintendo kid growing up, but the differences between the two 16-bit console versions of this game are pretty obvious, and it's clear that Rare was simply more comfortable designing games on Nintendo hardware. They developed both versions of the game we're looking at today, and in my opinion, the Genesis version didn't get as much attention and care as the Super Nintendo version. Take, for example, the music and sound effects. Although the Genesis was famous for its sound chip, I find the music and sound effects of the Super NES version to be a much richer experience. Not only that, but the size and detail of the sprites just make the Super NES version a much more obvious choice for me. The graphics of the Super Nintendo release are more detailed overall, and even the environments just seem to have more going on. So, how did these two fighting forces cross paths? You know the best place to find that answer by now. The text from the instruction manual gives us far more detail than either of the intros of the games themselves, and the good news is, the text between the Genesis and Super Nintendo manuals is exactly the same. Following her crushing defeat at the hands of the Battletoads on Ragnarok's world, the humiliated Dark Queen hightailed it to the outer reaches of the universe. Months have passed, and the Queen's parting threat of revenge has become a distant memory to Professor T-Bird and the Battletoads, Zitz, Rash, and Pimple. However, when a mysterious energy beam from outer space renders Earth's military might powerless, and a city-sized spaceship called the Colossus smashes out of the moon, the Professor knows it has to be the Dark Queen trying her latest galaxy-dominating plan. He's right, of course, but what he doesn't realize is that the Shady Lady's taking no chances this time, and she's cunningly teamed up with the equally shady Shadow Boss. This means that the Battletoads will not only have to fight the Queen and her sidekicks, General Slaughter, Big Blag, and Robo-Manus, but Abobo and Roper, the Shadow Boss's minions as well. So that's how it stands, Toads. The Dark Queen's got herself some serious backup, and now she's coming to take over your Earth. What are you gonna do about it? First of all, you're gonna get the sides even. The Those terrific twins, Billy and Jimmy Lee, otherwise known as the Double Dragons, are just raring to get in on the action, especially since the Shadow Boss is their archest of enemies. After picking up the dragons in the Battlecopter, it's time to play Space Cadets and intercept the mighty Colossus. Now's the time to get mad and bad as you begin your epic quest to save Earth from the bad guys. It's not going to be easy, team. The Colossus is a big ship, and there's bound to be a whole ton of trouble waiting within its neutron shields. And with trouble comes questions. Will the team up between the Toads and the Dragons be tight enough to defeat the Dark Hordes? And if so, will the Dark Queen and the Shadow Boss hang around long enough for you to settle the score? There's only one way to find out. So pick up that controller and play Battletoads Double Dragon, the Ultimate Team. Alright, so apart from that very last paragraph, there you have it. The Dark Queen and the Shadow Boss not only have names that seem like a match made years before they even met, but they started this fight. Although the opening cinematics for the Genesis and Super NES versions of the game do differ, they still do a pretty good job of filling in the story. I've been letting the character bios and the intro to each of the two versions of the game play out. You'll notice the obvious differences in graphics, dialogue, and definitely certain assets being reused from the Battlemaniacs Super Nintendo game. You should recognize that Battlecopter from episode 10 of our story so far. But, and you may need to rewind to catch some of these details, you'll also notice that the Genesis version of the intro specifically mentions that the Dark Queen has brought the Shadow Boss for backup. That's when the Toads decide to pick up the dragons. In the SNES version, Professor T-Bird simply contacts the finest warriors Earth has to offer. So this means one of two things. Either A, the Black Shadow Warriors, the criminal organization run by the Shadow Boss and Super Double Dragon, are big and well known enough that Professor T-Bird has a dossier on them and knows that the Double Dragons have foiled their plans before, and therefore knows to call on them. Or B, Professor T-Bird has done much more surveillance on Earth and what goes on our planet than anyone thought, and even though the Shadow Boss criminal activities had been fairly secluded to Los Angeles, again specifically mentioned in the Super Double Dragon manual, that didn't stop Professor T-Bird from keeping an eye on the Double Dragons. Think about it, so far this week we've discussed the confusing plot lines of the Battletoads. Aliens, game testers in virtual worlds, some sort of magic essence, but as we saw in episode 10, the Toads jumped off the Battlecopter in China, as mentioned in the Battletoads and Battlemaniacs manual, in Toad form. So it's settled. The Battletoads exist in the real world. That rules out them being game testers, and they probably wouldn't just travel around in Toad form and would instead only transform when they needed to battle if they were humans, which means the Battletoads must just exist on Earth. And if we know that the Dark Queen is capable of traveling to the outer reaches of the universe, then it's settled. The Battletoads are, simply put, aliens from another planet, now living on Earth, serving as protectors, fending off the Dark Queen and her evil forces. When the Ultimate Team is in full swing, there's a lot more at stake than Billy Lee's girlfriend or protecting your dojo. The fate of the world is in the hands of these 5 warriors. They're freakishly large, cartoonish hands. Many video games include nods to other franchises, and some universes can sometimes collide, but an outright team-up like this made my childhood brain short-circuit with ideas of crossovers that never came true. It was 1993, and I thought we were entering an era of cooperation, and the kind of Mario and Sonic combined game that every kid dreamed of was suddenly somehow possible. Then, many years later, they teamed up for reasons far less exciting than saving the world. But not the Battletoads and Double Dragon, not the Ultimate Team. They were teaming up in a game that was just like the other games they had come from. They were going to stop the Shadow Boss, the Dark Queen, and their various baddie henchmen. They would traverse worlds both familiar and new. Their tale would unfold as you progressed through the levels. This game represents what I consider video games' golden age, where consoles like the NES were passing off the torch to the Super Nintendo. Graphics and music were taking center stage. Storyline wasn't just an afterthought, and we never thought franchises were going to end. We thought that every game was just the latest game in the ongoing saga that is our story so far. Well, that wraps up Day 5 in our 5-day series. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you can head to ourstorysofar.tv and watch all the episodes in order. Now that we're starting to get more and more videos on the channel, I plan to do extra promotion and try and get a few more viewers. But as always, I'm here if you want to talk. You can reach me on Twitter at Nuangel, that's Nuangel, or just leave a comment. Also, like and subscribe if you have a second. For now, I'm going back to the old schedule, releases on every other Friday, but I hope you keep watching our story so far.